And I remember the first time the bus rolled up to middle school, and I was like in this kind of like lower class Jewish neighborhood, and we were all like these tiny
You're Jewish,
Jewish
right?
people. Yeah,
I am as well.
And we rolled up to middle school, and there was like these kids, 8-foot tall kids with beards, and they were just like beating each other up, and then beating us up, and it was just like that was the beginning of the end of school for me.
Yeah. So, do you think formal education is a huge scam? My guest today made $15 million after selling his business and lost it all in a few short months. He made another $10
Four
million.
times over.
4 times over. Oh, wow. I was going to say you made another $10 million but lost it all again, but it happened 2 more times. He started 20 businesses, 17 of them failed. He's been a hedge fund manager, a venture capitalist. He's written 21 books, including Choose Yourself right here, which sold over 1 million copies and was self-published. He's written thousands of articles, including many for Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Business Insider, and scores more. He's a board member for several companies. He claims to have single-handedly saved the U.S. stock market in 2009. He thinks college is a waste of time, as do I. I think this is going to be common knowledge in less than a decade. And he believes buying a home is financial suicide. We're going to talk about all of that today. And for good measure, he's a chess master and a stand-up comic. Please welcome the one and only James Altucher for the first live edition of Growth Mindset University. Give it up.
Thanks. Well, Jordan, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm really honored. I know you have a lot of people you could choose from to have as guests on this podcast. Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So you interned and studied with this kind of celebrity trainer and worked with him.
Right.
Did you meet a lot of the people he was training?
I met a few, nothing crazy, none of his clients are Fiji, like Fiji water, right? So he goes to their house all the time. I did not get to go. But I got to meet a lot of quality individuals.
What do you think he thought distinguished some of these successful people that he was training from other people he was training? Like, was there an extra discipline, or were they extra lazy because they were, already were successful and maybe felt like they could, in some ways, mentally splurge that success by not trying as hard anymore? Or were there any qualities that made, his celebrities that he was training different?
That's a great question. I am not 100% sure.
Did they have a growth mindset? Come on.
I bet they did. But I mean, something I think about all the time is, you have to have the courage to say, I don't know sometimes. And I'm not afraid to say it. I truthfully do not know the answer.
All right, that's fair enough. A lot of times, going on sometimes, television networks, you see people talking, like it's a panel of people talking about, the Trump trade war or taxes or the college admission scandal, and they have a bunch of pundits. You're really not allowed to say, I don't know, on TV. They will penalize you. They won't invite you back if you say, I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, and...
Did you ever do it?
Oh, yeah, all the time. And then I wouldn't get invited back for a while, and then... But TV's memory is fast, so they forget.
You were on TV a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, because a lot of times those TV segments, they're like 3 minutes, and as soon as you feel like, we're starting to make some sense here, is the segment's over. And now our next guest is going to talk about these extra large oranges being found in Brazil or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I was we had Dan Locke on the show, and I watched his segment on Fox, and it was like 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and Dan said, you probably don't even, at 2 minutes, 35 seconds, you probably don't even like me anymore by now after saying that or something like that. He's like, what? He's like, well, you've only got, the host was like, we've only got 10 seconds left. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Sometimes you
can't get the truth out, and you can't get everything out in 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
What do you mean? What's that? I'm just kidding. What's that?
Wrong word, but you can't tell the full story.
Right, but I'm interested in the word truth because you can't. That word has no meaning. Like, for instance, you have something in your ear, and they'll say, okay, they'll whisper to you, okay, James, jump in now and like argue. And
Really?
yeah, that happens in every news show.
Interesting. So
Another time I was on one show, I'll even say the name, the John Stossel show. I think it was on Fox then or ABC, I forget. And before they started the segment, this woman came out of nowhere. We're all mic'd up, we're all ready, and she gave me a brush and told me to go to the bathroom and brush my hair before going on the John Stossel show. That's the truth.
You know what?
That's how important the truth is.
You know what I was thinking about? You've had a similar hairstyle for quite some time. What would happen if he just shaved it all off?
I think I would be even uglier than I already am. Like I would stick out even worse.
Dude, I dig it. Like I would if you shaved it off. Like this is so you. Like it's just iconic.
Yeah, I don't know. It's people just, I don't know. I could never. It's always a mess. So it's just, I just grew it out longer and it stayed even worse. So.
You single-handedly saved the U.S. stock market in 2009, supposedly in your book. Tell me about that. What's the story there?
Well, I was living on the corner of Broad Street and Wall Street. So I don't know if you know that corner. On one side of the corner was my building. On another side of the corner is the New York Stock Exchange. And across the street from both of us was, from the New York Stock Exchange and my building, was the building where George Washington got inaugurated president. And there's a statue of George Washington. So I would walk out of my house each morning, and I just felt like, oh, this is history. It's like, what a historic place. My kids would even make fun of me. Like we'd walk out of the building together, and they would like imitate me saying, it's such a historic place, and like making fun of me. But around the time of the financial crisis, and in 2009, the stock market was just so down, and not even like, it didn't even make sense anymore for a lot of reasons, but we don't have to go into those. But it's just, and then I noticed everybody walking into the New York Stock Exchange, they were always like looking at the ground. They were always depressed. It was winter still, and they were sad, and the market was like at I don't know, the worst, the worst market fall since the Great Depression. And so one time I went out and I bought like 3 bags of chocolates, like the kind of chocolates you hand out on Halloween. And chocolate triggers oxytocin in the brain, and it triggers all these neurochemicals that not only make you happy, but encourage a little bit more risk-taking. So I just stood outside of the New York Stock Exchange one morning, and I handed out chocolates. I would go up to people who were walking in, and again, they were looking at the ground, they were depressed. And everybody, 100% of the people would look up first confused, like, why are you in my space? And then I would just be offering, like, here's free chocolate. And, you know that advice, don't take candy from strangers. All of them took candy from a stranger. And they took it, and they smile, and they, like, say thanks, and they would unwrap it and be like Hershey's Kisses, and they would eat the chocolate. That was March 9th, 2009. It was the exact bottom of the market since then. So I don't know, I have to take some credit, like that was the bottom of the market. I basically got everybody who was the major traders of the market to be happier and more encouraged to take risks. So it's not lying if it's true. So it's not bragging if it's true. I did it.
It sounds like you could argue, as people laugh, but I buy it. I totally buy that. This is like the little things, and I do believe it made a difference.
Yeah, because at that time, and now I'll get a little more wonky about it. At that time, there's no reason for the market to have been down that much then. The housing crisis was over. All the banks had been bailed out. So even if you thought that was bad or not, at least right then, all the banks had a lot of money. And, there was bank stocks that were giving dividends of like 15 or 16%. So it was ridiculous. Apple was trading for 5 times earnings. Like it was just kind of ridiculous. I remember there was one day where the swine flu was in the news. Like, oh no, there was like one outbreak of swine flu. And so there was a stock with the symbol HOGS, which was down 20% that day. It had nothing to do with swine flu. Yeah, maybe they sold as part of their product pork, but it had nothing to do with, you wouldn't get swine flu from eating their bacon. And it's just everybody was irrational in the market. Like, I almost wish the market was like that again, because you sort of, you realize how deeply fear creates opportunities in the market. So of course, Hogs was a great buy that day, and the market and bank stocks were a great buy on March 9th. But they also could have been a great buy on March 10th. It just so happens on that day that I handed out chocolates, just randomly, that was the bottom of the market forever.
We talk about a low in the market. You've had many lows. You talk about 4 times you kind of lost the money and made it back. There's a low point, I believe, in the 90s that you write about that you write about and Choose Yourself. You tried to check into a homeless shelter to find love, but they didn't let you.
Yes.
Tell me.
So I was
the reasoning.
I was a software guy back then. This is like a long time ago. This is 1991. Summer of 1991, and so it was a really long time ago. I had just gotten thrown out of school, and I was working for the summer for this place, and the job was fun. It was basically taking English documents and taking news articles and figuring out what the news articles were about and categorizing them. So technology like that later became useful in search engines, but in the first search engines that were created. And but I would sit out at lunchtime every day, and I'd see all these women going in and out of this one building, and I was single at the time and very insecure and unconfident in myself, similar to now. And I was wondering, what's that building? And it was a homeless shelter. So I figured, oh, this is great. This is definitely a place to. This was like the Tinder of 1991 for me. And so I went to meet. I remember his name, Bruce, was the guy running the homeless shelter. And I said, "Could I move in here? I'll be like a good influence on the homeless people here. I could maybe teach courses on something." And I really thought like this was going to be some kind of like love story. I'd meet some, desperate homeless woman, and she'd fall in love with me, and life would be great after that. And so he called. He's like, "That's a really odd request. Like, are you homeless?" And I'm like, No, but I want to live close to my work. I work right across the street. So he called my boss. My boss calls me into his office and says, "Do you want to live in the homeless shelter across the street?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how do you know you're going to be continuing working here?" And I'm like, "Well, do you have something to tell me?" And he said, "Yeah, well, you're not going to be continuing to work here after next week. Your thing is over, and we're not going to re-hire you." And so he told the homeless shelter basically told the homeless shelter I was crazy, and don't let me live there. And then he fired me. So, and I never met any women from the homeless shelter, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know.
So you talk about a couple of your downfalls, though, very well documented. You made the 15, lost it, as I mentioned in the intro. You made the 10 and lost it. What were the 2 other ones? I'm not actually familiar with those ones.
Yeah, I mean, one time I got a letter. This was in 2004. I had just made a bunch of money. I sold or helped sell a mental health facility company that I was involved with, not as a member, but not as a what do you call it? Not as a patient, but as an owner. And I had made some money, and then suddenly I got this letter from the IRS, and they said, "You didn't file taxes. You didn't file your taxes last year for the 17th year in a row." And during that time, I had, built and sold companies, and but I was, not the amount that I would have owed. Like, I thought in my head was so much more, like probably 20 times more than I actually had in the bank. And so I was just scared to death. I remember that night I was Googling like every case ever with the IRS, and I thought, man, I'm definitely going to jail. And and then I started figuring out. I started Googling like, well, maybe I should kill myself because I'm gonna go broke again, and I just can't bear the pain of that again, or I can't bear the pain of going to jail. But I didn't want to kill myself and hurt myself. So, because like you could kill yourself in painless ways, but most people, if I were to say like how, if you were to try to kill yourself, how would you do it?
Gosh, I'm such a dork. I don't even know how.
Like,
That's
just guess.
That's a great question. I wouldn't be able to figure out how to hang myself for the life of me.
Well, first off, hanging yourself would be the worst idea
Oh.
because you would just like hang there either, and you'd break your neck and just be sort of hanging there until you die, or you would suffocate for a few minutes until you die. So both ways are very painful.
Yeah, I think what I would do. Sounds weird to talk about, but I don't even know how to get my hands on a gun, but I guess I'd shoot myself. Yeah.
Yeah, but you did it this way. You sort of described doing it this way.
Yeah.
If you do it that way, you're very likely to just blow out one of your eyes and maybe go deaf. And so it wouldn't be pleasant. And so it was a lot of research, and ultimately I couldn't really figure out a good, safe way to kill yourself. It's a very ugly business. So I didn't do that. And I went to the IRS and basically worked out a deal with them and gave them all of my money and was broke again. So now I stay on top of it. Now they write me a letter like on April 15th. We need to hear from you. Like now I'm on their radar.
Well, now you stay on top of it. I was really wondering. I mean, because you've been up and down so many times. Who's to say you're not going to be down again? Like, do you anticipate being down again? If not, like, are you taking precautions? Like,
No, I don't. So there's 3 skills. So I feel now we're getting into it. So there's 3 skills to about money. There's making it, there's keeping it, and there's growing it. And they're completely different skills if you think about it. Like, making it involves all the sorts of things you read about in every business self-help book or you read about online, like here are some strategies to use, do this. Keeping it is totally a different skill. Here's, how you should allocate your money. Here's how you protect it. Here's what you should spend on. Here's how you should protect yourself. And then growing it, that's a whole other thing where it's like, okay, here's how you properly invest when you have a large amount of money and so on. That's a completely different skill. So I was good at the making it. I wasn't good yet at the keeping it, growing it. And I say yet because I've gone broke enough times that I was sort of able to look back and see each time what mistakes I made to go broke. And it was very clear to me what mistakes I made to go broke. On a personal level, I would sort of like think, after I made money each time, I would sort of think to myself, phew, that's it. That was that whole era of my life where I grew up poor. I was poor. I paid for everything. I was poor all along. And now I'm done with all the hard work of being a human. I could just start living large, living expensive, doing whatever I wanted, and enjoy myself.
So it was like, you go to the gym every day for a year or a couple of years, and you're like, oh, I'm fit for life.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
Right. Well,
you get flabby again.
Right. Your muscles will atrophy pretty quickly. Right. Like if you, let's say you built, let's say, I'm actually curious about this. If let's say you have an accident and you're in a hospital bed because of the accident and they're not letting you walk, how long will it be before your leg muscles atrophy enough that in order for you to properly walk again, you'd probably need physical therapy?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. That's what I thought. And because I think Stephen King mentioned that he after 2 weeks he had trouble when he was in a bike accident. And the same thing's true for even mental muscles. So I'll quote Stephen King again. After he was in bed for 2 weeks, he tried writing again. And this is Stephen King, who's written probably more bestsellers than anyone in history and sold more copies of his books than just about anyone else. After 2 weeks of not writing, he said, I couldn't even put a sentence together. I couldn't put 2 words together. Like he couldn't write. Like his writing muscles had atrophied. And it's the same thing. Like, that discipline, that kind of, I don't want to use the word hustle, but that eagerness to deliver value and to solve problems and to make money and to make all the right decisions with the people around you and in customers and products and execution. Those are muscles too, and they atrophy almost instantly after you stop using them. And so on a personal level, I think, and I talk about this in Choose Yourself, physically, I stopped staying healthy. Like, I'll never be in like great shape. I just not a workout type of person, but I just stopped like caring about myself. Like, I would not sleep properly, not move around properly, not eat properly. Emotionally, I wouldn't be around good people as much. Like, to make money, you have to be around other people who are focused on delivering value and helping you and so on. Creatively, I wasn't coming up with ideas anymore. Spiritually, I wasn't kind of surrendering to the things I couldn't control. And so that's on a personal level. But then on a money level, I would just start thinking I was smarter than I was. Like, well, I made 15 million here, so that must mean I'm smart. So I would make these huge, enormous investments in really bad companies and just go broke. Like, you can't invest in 20 or 30% of your net worth in some company that you think is good but nobody else does. You can't do that 7 times because then you'll go broke, because most of those companies will be bad. You'll go broke, and you're starting to make other big money decisions like, oh, I'm going to buy a house now. Well, that might go broke. A house is great when you have the money, but the one thing about a house is you can't get the money when you need it. So, all of a sudden it's the financial crisis, but I wanted to sell my house. Forget it. You're not selling your house for 3 more years. So, suddenly you find yourself making all these big and bad financial decisions, and then when you need money, you can't get it. So that's how I went broke every single time. And so what I do now, other than those personal things I mentioned, like I try to be creative every day. I try to surround myself. Yeah, I always write down ideas every single day on my waiter's pad.
Oh, I started doing it too. Look, 10 ideas.
Yeah,
10
it
ideas,
works.
10 ideas.
And that builds your idea muscle. Yeah. If your idea muscle within 6 months, it's like you've got like a jacked idea muscle. It really makes a difference. Like, suddenly you start having ideas all the time, and it's great. But I stopped doing it. And during these moments when I would get broke, I figured, I don't need to have ideas anymore. I'm just smart now. And I would make these huge investments in the worst companies. Okay, so so I stopped doing all the personal stuff, and then financially, I would just make every bad decision by making all these big investments. Now, I have all these rules. One is I stick to that personal daily practice of physical, emotional, creative, spiritual health every single day, and I'm always trying to challenge myself in new ways that are, try to always get out of your comfort zone. So you're always a little bit hungry. You're always challenging yourself and scaring yourself a little bit, like a dare of the day type of thing. And then financially, let's say you were to present me with the absolute best company in the world. Like, you're sure this is the best company in the world. I have 2 rules. One is people a lot smarter than me have to be going into the investment at the same level I'm going in. So like if you told me Warren Buffett's also investing and you can invest too at the same level Warren Buffett's investing, I'll be, okay, what am I going to do? Run into Warren Buffett at a cocktail party and say, Warren, how could you have invested in Jordan's company? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I would never argue with Warren Buffett at a cocktail party, because I'm the one drunk and he doesn't drink. And the second thing is I always keep my position sizes to no more than 2% of my net worth. So I would used to do like 20 or 30. I would be greedy. Oh my gosh, if I do 20% of my net worth and this goes up 100 times, then my net worth just went up 10 times. Like, if I had 15 million, it's going to be worth over 100 million. So I would never do that. 2% of my net worth at the most. And I never add to the investment, whether it's going down or whether it's going up. I never add to the investment, because if it's a great investment, I won't care. I'll make a lot of money. And if it's a horrible investment, I only invested 2% of my net worth. I could sleep at night. And then I diversify heavily. So, over time now, over the past 10 years of investing in private companies, I'm invested in companies in, tech, companies in the energy space, companies in the food space, companies in other countries, So I'm invested. I'm heavily diversified. So no matter what happens to the stock market, I'm fine. And uh, yeah, and then also I have income streams, so I don't rely on my investments. I also start businesses, and I take very little risk. I only like to start businesses that are profitable on the very first day, which again, not everyone is like that. Some people like to start businesses. Oh, I'm going to raise venture capital money, and we're going to lose money until we go public, and that whole thing. I don't take that kind of risk because most of those companies fail. You only hear the stories about Uber or Google that succeed. Most of those companies fail. If you're profitable from day one, though, it's really hard to fail. So,
So maybe this is the difference between the short game and the long game. Like you're investing 20% of your net worth into one thing. You're like, it's a really sexy idea to think,
yeah,
wow, it
it's
could
like
go
a
up.
cowboy.
Right, it could go up this much in such a short amount of time. It could be only a number of years before you make that big money, and it goes up a lot if you invest 20% in it. But if you diversify, I mean, it's a much longer game, right? Like you're playing the long game now in your investments.
Yeah,
Not looking for the quick win.
Absolutely. Like I have investments that I'm in now that I've been in since 2009, for instance. So that's 10 years. And I don't even want them, first off, it takes a few years for a company to hit its stride. So let's say it took them 5, 6 years before I realized, okay, they're over the hump. They're going to succeed one way or the other. I'm going to make money on this investment. It takes 5 or 6 years for me to even realize that. Otherwise, you don't really know. Are they going to succeed? Are they going to fail? They're not mature yet as a company. It's just like children at the age of 4, not mature yet. You can't let them walk across the street on their own. They need adult guidance. So it takes 5 or 6 years to see, okay, they're beyond the need for adult guidance. They're going to do well. But then that's when they start their biggest pace of growth. So now they're growing 100% a year. So now 10 years in, some of these companies, they're still growing 100% a year. If I got my money out now, it would be horrible because, oh, where am I going to put it? I don't really like putting it into something that's only going to grow 5 or 6% a year. I wouldn't know what to do. So I prefer not getting the money from these successful companies. I hope they keep growing 100% a year. Eventually that'll slow, and then they should probably sell the company. Or sometimes there are certain bubbles in certain sectors, and then you want them to sell to take advantage of that bubble behavior. So I've benefited from bubble behavior many times, but then you have to make sure you don't believe the bubble yourself, and you make sure to get cash instead of staying in stock.
Do you think you can time the market? Like I don't buy that. People are like waiting for like the perfect times to like get in and out.
I don't think you can time the market.
Right.
No.
It's like a bias. Like, oh, I'll know exactly when. Like I know people that are just waiting.
No, I think the most important thing for investors to repeat every day when they wake up is, I am not smart. I am the stupidest person around. I don't know anything. And by the way, every news source knows less than you. So don't get any information from the news because that's old news once it's in the news. Everybody knew the news 20 weeks before it's actually in the newspaper. And you can't, yeah, sure, you could say in 2009, oh, Apple's only trading at 5 times earnings. That's ridiculous. I can't say that I didn't suddenly say, oh, March 9th, 2009, I'm going to throw all my money into the market. I was fully invested all throughout the downturn. I didn't even though I knew the downturn was coming. I remember one of the guys in The Big Short, the book, not the movie, he pitched me his hedge fund, and he said, look, he showed me every reason why. This was in 2006. He showed me the entire U.S. economy is going to collapse. This is John Paulson, who made like billions of dollars betting against housing. He said, my only worry is that I don't get my cash out before all the banks collapse. Like, that's what he said was his only worry. And if not for the bailout, he probably would have had that problem. But I didn't invest with him. I'm always kind of somewhat optimistic. And the optimism pays off in the long run. Like right now, the market is within 1 or 2% of all-time highs, despite everything that's happened in the past 100 years. World War I, right. World War II, the Cold War, the Depression, the financial crisis, the bailouts. And what happens? Oh, we're within 1% of all-time highs on the market. And every part of the U.S. economy seems to be, working pretty well right now. So, you can't time the market. But sometimes when you're down, like people will say, "Oh, that guy's an idiot." So like, I would go on every financial news show. I was writing for every financial column all through the OOs. Then financial crisis happens. 2009 happens, and then even in 2010 there was it was either 2010 or 2011, there was a 20% market dip, and I went on TV. I was arguing against Nouriel Roubini, who was called Dr. Doom because he's always predicting bear markets, and it was me versus him. It was like July 5th, either 2010 or 2011, and I remember I was driving home. I got two phone calls, one from my mom, and she said, maybe you shouldn't smile so much when the market's down so much and you're on TV. And I'm like, but the market should be up like it always eventually does. And Nouriel Roubini had just said to me, oh, it was going to go down another 20% more. And then another person called me from a hedge fund, and he's like, everybody here thinks you're like the most stupid idiot in the world. And that was the bottom of the market even since then. And Nouriel Roubini has trashed me ever since. Like, I remember a year later, someone from some hedge fund wrote to him and said, when are you going to invite James to one of your famous parties? He beat you in that debate. And Nouriel Roubini wrote back on the email chain, and he said, only when the next recession starts. And this is 8 years later. He still has not invited me to any of his parties. So,
well,
and actually, he's blocked me on Twitter for some reason. Like, who thought? I've never once even communicated with him on Twitter. He blocked me.
Well, we're speaking of investments. You had a run-in with the man Bernie Madoff himself.
Oh yeah,
Can you tell that story? That's the best story ever.
It was sort of a bad and a good experience for me. So I was running a hedge fund, and my next door neighbor said, "Oh, you should come in and meet my boss, and maybe he'll help you. Maybe he'll allocate money to your hedge fund. He does that." And so I said, okay. So we drive in, we go and meet his boss, and his boss gives me the tour, and his boss is really showing me all sorts of stuff. He said, look at all these traders out here. They're all going to be replaced by computers within the next few years, which that prediction was very correct. And I said, and then he said, so James, what are you here for? What do you want? And I said, I'd really, I invest in a different strategy than you use, and maybe, it'd be great for you to diversify by investing in my strategy, and here's my returns, and so on. And he's like, well, A, my returns are better than yours, and B, if I give you money, I don't really know. I'm sort of just hearing what you do with the money, but I don't really know that's what you're doing with the money. For all I know, you seem like a good guy. He literally said you could have a job here if you want. Like, I like you and you seem smart, but I don't really know what you're doing once I give you that money. And the last thing we need to see here at Bernard Madoff Securities is our name in the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And so I left, and I was so depressed. Like, oh gosh, he's right. Like he's the man, and his returns are better than mine. Like, I can't compete. And so literally about a month or so later, I shut down my fund and tried to, or began shutting it down. It takes a long time to shut down. And I started another business, which I sold, a stock picker, which I sold to TheStreet.com for $10 million. But thanks to Bernie Madoff, I made my next batch of wealth, which I promptly lost a few years after that. Yeah. But here's the funny thing. As I was leaving Bernie Madoff's offices and really depressed, all these other hedge fund friends of mine were calling me, and they were like, did you figure out how he makes all his money? Do you think he would let us invest in his fund? And I didn't know the answer. And I reminded them several years later that they all called, and they were like, no, we knew all the time he was a scam. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I remember you calling me and saying we really want to invest with him. And they're like, that's impossible. We knew all along he was a scam. And I'm like, why would I make that up? Like, did I remember incorrectly? And they're like, you must have remembered incorrectly. Just everybody has really weird experiences and memories about money. It's like such a powerful energy that on the one hand, we try to ignore it. Like, we try to act like, oh, I don't care about the money.
Oh, right.
I care about other things, or but money takes up such mental real estate that people forget things. They'll never admit they were wrong. There's a lot of like sort of psychological skills you could learn learning about your attitudes, being aware about your attitudes towards money. So I know for me that it's better for me to not to plan in advance strategy so I don't have to think about money. So if you have a great company, I have to wait for you to tell me such and such great investor is personally putting money in before I even consider it, and then I will only consider maximum, 1 to 2%, 3% tops, but really not, unless there's huge risk taken out of the equation. 2% of my money, no more, will go into that investment. And then I'll invest. By the way, I don't even have to know what your company does. If you tell me Peter Thiel, for instance, or Warren Buffett or Mark Andreessen is investing in your company, and I'm allowed, and it's a low valuation, and I'm allowed to invest just 1 or 2% of my net worth, then I'll write the check. I don't even have to know what your company does. But and that's my 100% of my investment strategy for private companies.
Right, it makes a lot of sense. We're gonna shift to talk about one of my favorite things to talk about: education. To start off, I mean, you were thrown out of grad school. Why were you thrown out of grad school?
I was thrown out of graduate school. I was going to a really good graduate school for computer science, and I
You
loved
graduated from Cornell undergrad.
Cornell undergrad computer science, and then and I barely graduated because I graduated and I had to skip a year because I couldn't afford the fourth year, and to skip a year you needed a 3.0 GPA. I had like last day I had like a 2.999 GPA, and they weren't going to give me the diploma. And I had to go to one of my professors who was giving me a D- that semester. And I said, listen, can you just, I have no reason for this. Can you just give me a D+ instead of a D-? And he said, okay. And so I graduated. And then I was going to one of the best graduate schools in the country for computer science. There was basically Stanford, MIT, then Carnegie Mellon. And I barely got in there. I think the only reason I got in there was I realized after they put me in my office there, every student gets an office that he shares with 2 or 3 people. And my office mate was, it was called Chip Test at the time. It was a computer. Chip Test eventually became, they renamed it Deep Thought, and eventually IBM kind of hired the guy who made it, and he brought that computer, and they named it Deep Blue, and then Deep Blue ended up beating Garry Kasparov to be the first computer that beat a world chess champion. So it was this sort of iconic AI, artificial intelligence moment. But Carnegie Mellon had just given a PhD to its only student that was a chess master, so there was nobody left to play against Chip Test. And so I was a chess master, and so they said, okay, we'll accept you. Every other graduate school, by the way, rejected me. And Carnegie Mellon was the best. I thought if all these other schools are rejecting me, certainly the one school that was the best by far that I had applied to was going to reject me. Even Cornell, my undergrad school, rejected me. And it wasn't as good as Carnegie Mellon for computer science. But they accepted me, and my office mate was the guy who made this chess computer, and that's what I had to do all day long was play this chess computer. And then I got thrown out because I got interested in writing, and I wanted to write. I totally lost interest in computer science, like in the first semester for whatever reason, and I got really obsessed with things you should get obsessed with in first grade. I got obsessed with my first grade of graduate school, which is reading and writing. So I just started writing 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and that's all I would do. I would skip every class. I failed every single class I took in graduate school, but they were giving me this really nice fellowship, and so probably unethical, but I stayed for 2 whole years, failing every single class, and then finally they wrote me a letter saying, sorry, James, you're not really mature enough for grad school. When you feel you have enough maturity, would be happy to take you back, but for now you have to leave. And so they cut me off. And the guy who wrote that letter was the dean of students, and he became my one and only chess student right after I was thrown out of graduate school. And so he was my student, and we've been best friends ever since.
Oh, did you ever plan on going back, though?
He asked me every single year, and now he's like the dean at Georgia Tech, and he's like, look, just come here for a few months, write a paper, and we'll give you the PhD. And I'm like, nah, I'm not mature enough yet.
Yeah.
So I can't go back.
Yeah. Well, I feel so. I know your stance on education. I've seen you write about it many times. When did you start to your beliefs about education and the system as a whole start to become what they are now?
Well, it started off as a financial thing. What are the things people spend the most money on in life? They spend their most money on a house and on college, and then I don't know what's after that. Like maybe a couple of cars, or maybe nothing even comes close to house and college. So if you're kind of upwardly mobile, you're buying more and more expensive houses and spending more and more money, and you want to send your kids to a pretty good college, and even like middle tier colleges, like not even in the top 100, their tuitions now are as high as like Harvard, like over $60,000 a year. And so I started. So for me, my biggest mistakes were always not only just making huge financial decisions with investments, but making other huge financial decisions like buying a house or going to college. And I started looking into this. Tuition has gone up 10 times faster than inflation every single year since 1977. In fact, tuition is up more than inflation since then by a factor of 10. Healthcare, which people usually go broke because of healthcare costs are only up a factor of 3 over inflation, but tuition's up a factor of 10. And it's because the government will let 18-year-olds take out $250,000 in loans and say, don't worry about it, don't worry about it.
No questions asked.
Yeah, no questions asked. And then, oh, by the way, this is the one type of loan you cannot not pay, or we will get you in every pot. We'll take it from your salary, we'll take it from your home, we'll take it from everything. So now student loan debt's gone from $200 billion in 2002 to $1.6 trillion now. 22 million adults have student loan debt. And the debt, they're never going to pay it back. Like somebody wrote me 2 days ago, she has $363,000 in student loan debt. And you think, oh my God, well, she didn't have to go to Harvard. No, she went to some random school. She did a year or two of law school, and she's stuck now because she doesn't want to be a lawyer. So, which happens to many people, but it used to be a generation ago, you didn't have $363,000 in debt. You had maybe $40,000 in debt, $20,000 in debt, and you can still start a company and participate in the American frontier, which is entrepreneurship and innovation and helping people and delivering value. Now, I literally know people who get great degrees and they have to get like a job as a salesperson in an eyeglass store because you have to immediately start paying down that debt. And what happens is that rich people send their rich kids to college without debt. Those rich kids marry other rich kids who are also not in debt and going to those best schools. And the people in debt, are going to not as good schools. They're taking on this huge student loan debt. They marry people in huge debt. And so it goes another generation. And so that's really how income, it's not even an education thing. It's a huge societal income inequality thing where income inequality is getting greater and greater. Those 22 million Americans can't go off and start companies anymore. So in China with, something like 500 million people with college degrees or whatever, they're starting companies, they're improving on their technology. The world's shifting, and in part it's because young kids are so straddled by debt. Now, on the educational side, it does not take 4 years to learn a skill. And employers even are looking more and more at skills than degrees. So it takes maybe a year to learn a skill well enough as if you had gone to a 4-year college. And you can learn it online for free, any important skill that will help you in your job. Instead of the 80% of American students are like involved in they're majoring in some kind of grief studies, and nobody's learning real skills because you could learn those all online easily. And I don't know, even from an educational perspective, but then people say, oh, but it's a good way to socialize, learn how to be social. I don't have to pay my kid $250,000 to make friends from the ages of 18 to 22. She's going to do that, like with or without me paying her to do it.
Well, what's like the alternative then? Like, so you're an 18-year-old. What's the socialization then? The socialization equivalent?
Well, that's a great question because 18-year-olds are so brainwashed by their school system into thinking there's only one way to live in society. And
Isn't that right?
so I have 18-year-olds. I have two 17-year-olds, an 18-year-old, and two 20-year-olds, and everybody, they're all five of them are convinced they need to go to college to have a good life. No matter what they've read all my stuff. No matter what I say, my daughter who's in college, I said to her, I will pay you exactly. Tell me the tuition amount. I will just give you cash, and you can have it, and just do what you love to do. So she wants to be an actress, which is really hard to do, obviously. Majoring in acting is not going to make you a successful actor. So I said, why don't you spend a year at least learning auditioning, which is not taught in college. And that's a big part of the lifestyle of being a successful actor. See if you could psychologically handle it. Bartend or be a waitress, because you're going to have to do that if you want to be a successful actor. Do the things that actually will give you a 4-year head start and will teach you more quickly the skills. Now, you asked for socialization. Do you think if she's a waitress and also spending half her time auditioning, she's not going to meet other kids her age or similar age who are doing something similar? By the way, they don't have to be her age. I have no friends who are my age. I have friends who are up to 20 years older and up to 30 years younger. Like you're as you get older and older, your friends are not your age anymore. We're not in the same grade. Like that's a school thing. Like I have friends all over the age map. I don't know if anyone is exactly my age that I'm friends with. Nor do I ask. Nor do I know if anybody has a degree that I'm friends with. So these things start to disappear in importance, all the things that kids think are important. And I try to tell my 18-year-old, I stopped arguing. I would do more questioning. And well, what do you think the degree is going to help you with? Getting a job. Well, what about the fact that Google, Ernst & Young, and these other 50 schools say they no longer will look at degrees? I even just read an article today. Some big company no longer is even allowed to look at degrees. They tell their people, don't look at degrees at all. And they showed real high executives who have no degrees. But my kids won't believe it. They say, oh, no, it's just for safety. I'll get a job if I have a degree. And, I don't know how to convince my kids. Now, I suppose what could have convinced them would have been to say, well, I'm going to force you to take out the loans. But I didn't do that.
Well,
which is maybe a mistake. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're sold this default path. We're like sold an American dream, and I don't want to give off the wrong connotation there, but I think you know what I'm saying. I mean, you talk about the default path where it's like go, get good grades so you can get into a good school, go graduate with good grades so you can get a good job and work in that job for 40 years until you're 65 years old, then retire and depend on a non-existent social security check for the next 3 years until you die and save everything, including travel, for those 3 years. Why are we so stuck on that path?
Well, I think...
Because I don't want to participate. I'm not participating.
Just think of yourself and think of every parent here or every parent listening to this. Up to the age of 13, kids sort of latch onto their parents. Like when they're 12 or 11, they're still latching onto you when you cross the street. Like, help me cross the street. But at the age of 13, we all know teenagers start to get a little bit more aggressive with their parents and they start to hang out with their friends more, which is fine because 70,000 years ago, somebody my age would have been dead and they couldn't rely on help. A 15-year-old 70,000 years ago couldn't rely on help from their weak, old parents. They could only rely on forming strong bonds with their peers. And our DNA is not different. Just because society is different than it was 70,000 years ago, we're no longer running from lions and other tribes and whatever. Society is very different, but the DNA is the same. So they start to latch onto their peers, and all of their peers think that college, America has spent trillions of dollars training kids to think college is the only way to go. I mean, the American government makes a lot of money on the interest from student loans. American government makes a lot of money on the interest from housing loans. So everything in the educational system, which is essentially run by the government, trains kids to think in only one way, and the kids then compete with each other, and their peer group says, "Oh no, if you don't get into this school or that school, or you don't have this on your SAT." I mean, the SAT is like the stupidest test ever, the stupidest way to measure aptitude ever, and now they're adding like an adversity score, so it gets complicated. And like everything has good intentions. Like, yes, it's good intentions. Like, take into account the differences in people. It's good intentions. Everybody should have a higher education. These are all good intentions, but they're not the only way. And at some point, people decide this is the only way, and then they spend trillions of dollars trying to convince everyone else. So that's very convincing. And there are other ways. And I do think eventually the debt will get so high that people are just like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. You're killing society. But I hope it's not too late when we get that realization.
Yeah, well, I'll play devil's advocate for a second. I mean, for me to play devil's advocate on education is interesting and unheard of, because I'll post like, and people know this here, I will post on LinkedIn, formal education is a huge scam, and just take all the flack, some flack, but mostly people are on board, which is interesting. More and more people are agreeing now, and I've even seen it shift over the past 6 months.
Yeah, when I first wrote about this in 2005, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I first wrote about this in 2005. No one agreed with me. I lost friends, everything. But now I think it's at least a discussion, although my kids don't agree. But it's at least a discussion among people.
You know, it's interesting. Somebody even commented on one of the posts. I mean, I kind of go off about it every 2 weeks, but it was like a month or two ago, and one of the comments was, "Yep, one of those subjects that everyone seems to agree upon." And I was like, "Wow, things have really changed in this talk." It was just 6 months ago, 7 months ago, that I was getting viciously attacked for all of this. It was like 80% good, agreeing, 20% hatred. But now it's like 95 agreeing, 5% like, well, and it's not even like hatred anymore. It's like they're on the defense.
I think it's because candidates for president now have realized it's a problem, so they're talking about student loan debt relief. I don't know if that's the solution, actually. I don't know.
What's the solution?
Well, I think the solution is, first, increase, price is a function of supply and demand. So we've drastically increased the demand. There's a fixed amount of accredited college seats, but we've drastically increased the demand by essentially making it free for 18-year-olds. They think it's free because they don't understand the debt that they're taking on. They don't understand what risk is. The prefrontal cortex of the brain, a human typically finishes growing that at the age of 25, and that's the part of your brain that assesses risk. So by definition, 18-year-olds are mentally ill. Like their brains are deformed from the brains of adults, and they don't know how to assess risk. So for them, and there's no risk at all in going to college. So that's why they don't agree. But so you can't. I don't know if they're always going to have demand if you make it free for them. The way you increase supply, though, to reduce price is, let's just make all online colleges accredited, and those have infinite seats. So make Coursera or Khan Academy or Code Academy, which teach actual skills. They've been around for a decade. People have learned lots of skills and gotten lots of jobs because of these, so they're clearly providing a good education. Let's make them accredited. Then boom, supply goes way up. Demand remains the same now, and price goes way down. So that at least solves the price problem. In terms of debt relief, I don't know. Sure, it would be great to forgive everyone's debt, and maybe it should come from the private sector, like that. The billionaire Robert Smith is paying back all the loans from Morehouse. I thought that was a really good thing. I think more steps like that coming from the private sector, like they benefit from the educational system, so help the people who are now in debt from going to the same colleges that you did. That seems good, rather than, the government seems to complicate everything, and it's not that I'm such a libertarian, but I'd rather individuals help, than a big institution helps.
Well, it's not even the financial side of things that I look at when it comes to education. That's half the problem. That's only half. The other half of the problem is that I don't even know that we're getting an education in there. We're learning, some of the things we're learning are, I mean, the syllabi and material are decades outdated.
Yeah, and even they say, oh, well, not enough. Only 7% of kids in college now are doing some STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. And
7%?
yeah, which is 33% in China, 7% here. And I don't even know if that helps. Like, I majored in computer science. Then I went to graduate school in computer science. And then after I was thrown out of graduate school, I stayed around the grad school enough. Like, I had various jobs doing programming at the grad school. So it took another 3 years before I got a real job. I got a job at HBO doing computer programming. And I had already, I got this undergrad degree at a good school for computers. I had programmed for years and years and years. I had studied it for years and years and years. I couldn't do anything. I was the lowest level programmer at my job, and I was completely incompetent. I was so incompetent. The people at HBO, they said to me, like, look, we don't want to fire you, but we have to send you to remedial computer programming classes. And I'm like, I got accepted to, I can't say I went, but I got accepted to graduate school at Carnegie Mellon for computer science. I've been programming for years. I got my undergrad in computer science. With my computer science classes were almost all A's. And I was an idiot at computer programming. I had to take 2 months of remedial classes at AT&T. And then, but then I got really into it and I got better. You can only really get good at things you're passionate about. Somehow or other, I got passionate again about programming, and I was good for a short while more.
Well, now I think it's compounded because here's what's going on in the universities. I'll give you the inside scoop, because unfortunately, I call it prison. I get out of prison in a year. I am still in prison. I'm still in school. And here's what's going on in there, especially in the business school. The homework assignments, the homework and quizzes are McGraw-Hill. You just click through them, and you can still get an A just by clicking through them. The tests are auto-generated by McGraw-Hill's test bank of questions. You just click like the learning outcomes, and out comes a test. We bubble it into a Scantron, and then that Scantron comes out with a number that somehow defines us. Grades are an illusion, by the way, and the teachers are reading from McGraw-Hill PowerPoints that are just the same. They're cookie cutter classes, and we're not actually learning anything. And the system can be gamed. Cheating is rampant. The system can be gamed. If it can be gamed, it most likely, a lot of the time, will be gamed. So more and more, this problem is compounding, and people are coming out with no education, really.
Yeah,
we're not learning anything that's relevant to the world today. We're not.
I agree.
We seek outside resources.
You use the word prison. Colleges they started in the Renaissance, and there used to be, you'd have a college, you'd send all your 18-year-old men to it, and there was guards circling the college. But the guards were not facing outwards, keeping out, roving bands of barbarians or whatever. The guards were facing inwards to make sure the students wouldn't escape, because this was right after it used to be, everyone knew violent crimes were most likely to be committed by men ages 18 to 22. So in the medieval period, kings would send the 18-year-old men off to the Crusades, like, go to Jerusalem, get out of here. And those were over. So now it's like, okay, we'll call it a college, but it's really a prison. Like you say, this is how they avoided like violent crimes in their various kingdoms.
I mean, I tell you what, I guess I refer to it as prison because like the only thing, or one of the only things that gets me down nowadays, I've done so much to just build good around my life. Like there's so many tools in my tool belt to like make me feel good all the time. Like reading every day, non-negotiables, like reading 10 pages. I wake up, read Choose Yourself. I read, I read some Mark Manson. I read Tony Robbins, and I'll exercise and I'll eat right, no grains. And those are my tools in my tool belt. But school gets me down. Like the fact that like I'm there, it's like crushing my creativity, my uniqueness, and it's just like
Yeah,
it's a gigantic and tragic criminal waste of time and energy and resources.
Yeah, because look, you're doing this podcast, so obviously this is not like a school thing. So you're learning an important skill by doing this. You're talking to, not counting me, you're talking to interesting people all the time, probably.
Yeah, Mark Manson was on it.
Oh yeah, Mark Manson's a great guy. So he's been on my podcast as well
several times.
And so you're learning real things, and then you go back to school. It's probably like a different world. This is more the real world where you're learning. Like when I was in graduate school, but I started writing all the time. Then I was, oh, this is like what it's like to build a really difficult skill and get good at it. It's very hard to do. It's not like getting an A. You're going to get thousands of Fs before you get one C, before you get one A. Like that's a real skill that you're going to learn in life. And you never learn that. Like if one of my daughters gets an A-, she starts crying. And I one time I was teaching my daughter when she was much younger, I was teaching her to play tennis, and she would start crying if she hit the serve into the net. And I said, look, you need to learn how to hit a good serve. You're going to have to take enough risks to hit the ball into the net many times. But they don't teach you this in school because you're supposed to get an A all the time, which is a completely wrong philosophy of life. It's like the reverse philosophy of life.
Well, fittingly enough, they don't teach it in school. This podcast is all about learning the lessons we should have learned in school, but did not, and learning them from the people that we should have learned them from. Because, I mean, most often, too, the professors, on top of them not being particularly dialed in, they haven't actually done the thing that they're talking about.
Right, like what if there's a class that told you, hey, write down 10 ideas a day, and by the way, okay, tomorrow's class, write down 10 ideas that are improvement on yesterday's 10 ideas. Okay, now write down 10 ideas that Amazon could do to improve themselves. Now take 2 of your idea lists and combine them and see what the combination of ideas looks like. Like there's not a single class that actually teaches maybe the most important skill for building a business and a life skill, which is how to have ideas and be creative. There's no classes on that.
Have a jacked idea muscle like we were talking about earlier. I mean, it's so important. And I showed you. I mean, I've just seen, I can see, I mean, I've only been doing this the past week or two, but I can see how it's going to change my life. I mean, the idea is not to have 3,650 good ideas per year. Like, it's not possible, right? But it's just to exercise that idea muscle and become really good at that.
Right. The whole purpose is just to have the idea muscle. So you could have ideas about anything, stupid ideas. Like I had an idea list the other day, 10 things like really wrong with recent superhero movies. So for instance, I'm not going to give a spoiler for Avengers Endgame. Did you see Avengers Endgame?
I did not. I'm very sheltered in the movie world.
Okay, I'm not going to give any spoilers anyway. But the bad guy, if you watch the first scene, this is the very first scene, he's on a planet in a T-shirt picking fruits. Like his whole philosophy was basically a weird way of destroying the universe in order to prevent climate change. And the superheroes are all trying to kill him, and he just wants to like pick fruits after everything's all said and done. So I just came up with like a list of, again, maybe bad ideas, but they're not even really ideas at all for anything. But it's just like a list of ways to stretch myself. Like, in what ways is the Black Panther movie actually the most racist movie? In what ways? Why did nobody on Star Wars ever read a single book? There's just all these weird things with all the movies we love. So I just wanted to come up with a weird list.
I'll share with you my last 3 ideas from May 19th. The first one is drop out of school and don't give a because there's a lot of social and parental pressure there. Never drink alcohol again, and then drink 200 ounces of water a day. I think those are good ideas.
Those are good ideas, yeah.
I really want. I don't know.
I should do the water thing.
200 might be too much. I don't know. You could die from drinking too much water.
I think the right amount is like 8 of these a day.
Yeah,
but I don't do that.
I think that's right too. I heard like twice your body weight, or no, half your. What is it? I think maybe it's half your body weight.
That sounds reasonable.
So for me, I guess. It'd be 70 ounces.
Well, what I do is when I wake up, I make sure I drink a whole one of these first thing because after 13 hours of sleeping, I need to. I'm dehydrated. No, I'm just kidding. After 8 hours.
I love sleep, but it's too much.
After 8 hours of sleeping, you're usually dehydrated, so you got to drink water, and a lot of people don't.
Yeah, I mean, to circle back from like, we mentioned Steve Jordan and the mentor. You turned the tables on me and asked a question. One of his golden rules is 16 ounces of water right when you wake up.
Oh, that's good. 60. This is
So,
what is this? Like
I
12?
think it's like 16.9.
Okay.
I don't know where they got the
All right,
0.9
good.
from, but that's how water bottles are. Maybe it's 16.7. No, 16.9. I was right. So we want to talk a little bit more about education. We're going to start to put a bow on it. And if you were, what question would you ask parents to consider if they are wondering if college is the right thing for their children?
Well, I mean, just picture, what if you just had this money that you were going to put aside for college, whether it's debt or your money, and imagine the kid exploring interests, but having this money in their bank account that they can't spend it. They need your approval on everything. I don't know. Who knows the right methodology there? But just imagine what they can do in those 4 years if they didn't go to college. Like I mentioned, my daughter who is interested in acting, she could go through 4 years of auditioning, 4 years of taking improv classes, 4 years of taking maybe singing classes, and then learn also all the skills that actors need, like being a good waiter in a big city. You can actually make a lot of money. And then she can also learn all of the interests that all the other people she meets are starting to explore and come up with ways to maybe succeed. So right now, she's in an opinion ghetto where everybody believes the exact same thing.
Opinion ghetto.
No one's actually learning real-world skills that they can use. So when she graduates at 22, she'll have essentially no money and no skills and starting from scratch at a point where she could have started 4 years earlier. So I don't know what question to ask parents really, because parents usually also want to send, like, look at all these parents who were rich and famous who they paid like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get their kids into mediocre schools. It's crazy. And then you have like the Dr. Dre saying, oh, well, my kid didn't cheat. She got into whatever school, the right way. Oh, what about the $70 million donation you made for their new library? Like, it's just all kind of this weird scam.
Well, yeah.
And by the way, I don't
it's a
blame him.
scam.
He
Yeah,
did
yeah.
he did what he felt he had to do, but I don't know if parents are the right people to convince. I think the kids will be convinced when they realize how much pain they're in. The parents are not in pain, the kids are.
Well, back to devil's advocate from like 30 minutes ago before I lost that. I don't know that the answer, as much as I despise what's going on in the education system and I think it's criminal, I don't think the answer is to not go to school. It's just to incorporate the relevant learning outcomes and and maybe not have it be as outrageously expensive and inflated. I mean, as you were mentioning, it's inflated much, like, disproportionately compared to other things.
Yeah, so that's why
we just got to revamp the system. It's not a terrible, unfixable problem.
Right, so that's why there's several solutions. One is to increase the supply of seats so price goes down. The other is to maybe reduce demand by showing people that, big companies don't require degrees. And also showing kids you can get skills in other ways now, particularly with YouTube and all these online courses and everything. Then the actual equation of price as a function of supply and demand might be accurate. Right now it's not accurate, and that's part of the problem. And then, I don't know, just to show kids that there's alternatives to it. Then if you decide to go to school, power to you. Go to school. I don't even think kids should go to high school, to be honest, but that's another discussion. I see now kids go to high school because they're afraid they're not going to get into college. So they're up at like 1, 2 in the morning preparing for these stupid AP exams. Literally, like, they'll be crying at 1 in the morning while finishing their homework and tears dropping on their homework. It's like the worst thing we're putting these 16 and 17-year-olds through.
There were a couple of good things I was thinking about in high school the other day. As far as learning goes, the overall experience was just piss poor for me, but that's another story. I was introduced to The Great Gatsby in English class, and To Kill a Mockingbird. Even just the vocabulary that we did in that class in ninth grade, I felt benefited me.
So it's great that you learn from those. I had those books also then. I didn't learn from them then. I had to reread them at age 25, and then I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. So for me, and for everybody, I think it's just different the age when you realize, oh, there's art and beauty here. I would never, because I was interested in other things in ninth grade, I would not have appreciated. I did not appreciate Old Man and the Sea, Great Gatsby. Old Man and the Sea now is a book I reread every single year. I hated it in ninth grade. I read one chapter and I said, forget it. I'm just going to use the Cliff's Notes, which was then the equivalent of cheating. I don't know if that even exists anymore. And
well, it's even worse.
yeah, now you can just buy your essays online.
That you could go to. So every single answer to these quizzes that we have to take online, and I kid you, every single one. It's on a website called Quizlet.com. Everyone just copy, paste, and it shows up verbatim, word for word in Quizlet. And it's so like you could just, again, you don't have to pay attention. You could just get in it. You just have the answers there. They're all there.
Yeah, so I believe it. So why go to high school even?
True.
I think junior high school probably, I don't know, junior high school was the worst. I wouldn't even think it. Homeschool is like the only thing I would do. I remember like when I went, elementary school was fine. Like, but then when we switched to like middle school, and I remember the first time the bus rolled up to middle school, and I was like in this kind of like lower class Jewish neighborhood, and we were all like these tiny
You're Jewish,
Jewish
right?
people. Yeah,
I am as well.
And we rolled up to middle school, and there was like these kids, 8-foot tall kids with beards, and they were just like beating each other up, and then beating us up, and it was just like that was the beginning of the end of school for me.
Yeah. So, do you think formal education is a huge scam?
Yeah, completely, for all the reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
mostly
agree.
because of the good intentions of, let's say, give everybody an education that got twisted. I mean, why does the president of some of the tiniest schools in the world, I don't even want to call any out actually, but like a president of one like really bad tiny school makes $3.5 million a year, and if you just Google that, you can see which one. But they all kind of make millions a year. Why are they making so much money? Like the presidents of these schools, because they know they can charge more and more, and the government will take care of it.
Yeah. So a couple of more topics here. About saying no. You have a really good philosophy around saying no. Like, how do you? I mean, because why? First of all, why do you say no to certain things? And second, how do you do it?
Well, I think it's really hard because it's a confusing thing. Like often it's the case that you should say yes to a lot of things. Like when you're young, you should say yes to new opportunities and experiencing new things. And even when you're older, you shouldn't want to just sit in your house all day and watch TV. You need to say yes. Like, okay, I'll do this. I'll go out to this event. I'll go out to this museum or meet these friends or. And often my instinct is to say no, like, I don't really want to, what am I going to say to them? I don't really want to go out at all. But if you kind of judge something in your mind and, you're either like super excited about something, like as they say, it's either like a hell yeah or it's a no. And so sometimes I say yes to things. Like I said yes to something recently that was me doing a bunch of live podcasts around the country. And
Oh yeah, I
realized, if I say no to this right now, it's not too late, and I feel like this enormous wave of relief. So that told me, okay, I need to say no. And then you just say no as honestly as possible. You write to everybody and you say, look, I'm being really honest. This doesn't really seem to be right now for me or for my audience, and I have too many things going on, so I can't really devote my full resources to this. I apologize about this. If you never want to talk to me again, that's fine, but let's potentially revisit this at a future date. So that's one way of saying no. Another way, how do you say no in a relationship? Like, let's say you're with somebody for a long time, but it's not working out, and you want to end it. That's another kind of saying no, and that's very difficult. It's usually very difficult to decide to say no. But again, if you wake up in the morning and you feel like, my life would be better if nobody was sleeping right next to me right now, then you probably should say no to that relationship if you consistently think that. And that's another type of no. You kind of need strategies for each type of no. You want to do no where it inflicts the least amount of hurt on anyone, and you take responsibility for the things you might have done wrong to get to this point, and you have to really think of a strategy that works for each no.
Well, you know what I took from you the other day? I was like, so I got this question. I get these questions all the time, and it's like, Jordan, hey Jordan, this is the first time I've ever heard from this guy, first time I've ever seen his name, like, no prior relationship. Hey Jordan, can you introduce me to Dan Locke? Like, and I was like, let me just risk my highest value connection.
I get that too.
And so I get in the shower and I'm like, God, what am I gonna do? Do I ignore it? I have a problem with ignoring things. I've gotten better at it recently, and then I as I'm preparing for our interview, I put you on a podcast, and you talk about saying no and literally just saying no and with no explanation. And because if you give an explanation, then you give room for them to come back with, oh, well, that's okay. We can just do this instead. So I got back and I said, can't. And he goes, no problems, mate. And I said, oh, thanks for understanding.
Yeah,
It
no,
works.
I think that being really direct about it, you're right. Like you can't, there's no reason why suddenly you have to defend yourself. Like they're the ones who are asking, and then suddenly you have to defend yourself. Sometimes, and people always say to me, well, it didn't hurt to ask. Actually, it did hurt to ask me, because you're not valuing the time and effort I put in to build that connection. So now I don't value my connection with you as much because you asked me that. So sometimes it does hurt to ask. I have one friend who says, if you never ask, the answer is always no, which is good advice too. But on something that's like high stakes, where it's like I'm asking a personal connection of mine for a favor, I don't even, just like I'll say no a lot, I won't ask a lot depending on the strength of my connection with that person. Mm-hmm. Now, if I were to give an answer to someone like that, I would have to say, look, I do what's called permission networking. So I need to know all the reasons you need to talk to him. Then I need to talk to him and go through all of your reasons. And if and then I need to make sure everyone's in agreement. Then I make the intro. And usually by then, people are like, okay, don't bother, because they understand then the effort I have to do, and then they're asking me for a lot of effort. Now, some people then will say, okay, I want to ask them this, and I realize the person's going to say no, and I don't want to ask them anyway, and then I write no. So,
well, yeah, I agree on all the above, not the above, but all mentioned there.
But again though, like it also puts into light the times you ask other people for favors. You got to be really selective of that. Like you can't risk a no from them if they're a strong connection that you trust. Mm-hmm. Now, if I write Barack Obama, who's not a strong connection of mine, and I say, hey, you want to come on my podcast? That's actually a valid question, because chances are he's going to say no. It puts my name in front of his PR people. Like I'll give a reason. I'll say, look, Barack Obama supporting these 18 causes. We'll talk about them. I'm really interested in them. I have an audience of this, and they're all influencers, and it'll be, it'll make a small dent in his thing. So I'll give good reasons why you have to always ask with their agenda in mind. And so then I'm willing to have a no, and they're aware that I'm willing to have a no, but I'm at least showing them that I'm thinking of their agenda instead of mine. Like, oh, it'd be great to have Barack Obama on my podcast. That's a horrible way to ask it. So you have to know how to. I had a book, The Power of No, and then I was going to do a book. I had a deal to do a book, The Power of Ask, which is showing people how to properly ask, which is hard for me to ask. And I only write books about things that are hard for me personally, so this way I have to learn how to do them. But I ended up never doing. I ended up saying no to that book deal once I got it.
Where does your chess master, we've talked about so many things today, where does chess fit into all of this?
Well, chess is great because it's a good way to, it's a good activity to do while I'm on the phone with people. So I'll just log on online somewhere and like, okay, yeah, how's it going? And I'm just playing chess while talking to people. But it's also been good it was good for me to learn. I learned it relatively late, meaning I was like 17 when I started taking it seriously. But I got very good very fast. And it was a good thing to learn how to learn. So I learned all the skills I needed to quickly become like a very strong player at a skill that was important to me. And so now I use those meta skills to learn other skills that are important to me, whether it's investing or selling or negotiating or stand-up comedy or public speaking or computer programming or, I've been able to, I always view it as I'm able to quickly skip the so-called 10,000 hour rule because of the way I learned chess. I break it down and learned all these meta skills about learning. And so that was very valuable to me. It's also valuable to me in this kind of BS way in that people think chess and intelligence are correlated, but they're totally not. But I've been able to take advantage of that repeatedly in my life. That has been such an amazing gift that just society views chess as related to intelligence. And so I've gotten jobs, I've raised money, I've made friends, all because I've gotten in places that normally I would never be able to get into, all because I was good at chess.
Fantastic. So, throughout all the ups and downs in your career and your life, in all of your businesses and ventures, what have you, we're back here. You're doing very well. Seem like a happy guy. What's next for you? How do you envision your career panning out over the next 20 years?
I don't know. I never think about that. I just think what would be, of all the things I'm interested in, let's say there's 5 things I'm interested in, what's the highest priority thing for me to do today to keep moving forward one of the 5 things I'm interested in? So, for instance, a year ago or 6 months ago, I had an idea on my list of ideas. I had an idea for a TV show, and it was one of those things where it was stuck in my mind. So I figured, you know what, this might be a good idea. So I wrote an agent the idea, and I've written him ideas many times over the past 3 years. He usually never responds to me, or he'll write back simply no. But this time he wrote back within 3 seconds, call me. And I called him, and then he got the president of a big production company on the phone, and they all agreed, let's go forward. And then they made appointments with a bunch of networks. I went, and so moving it forward, I really fleshed out the idea because it was only one line when I sent it to him. I had to really flesh it out. And then I had to prepare and think about how I was going to pitch it to networks. So that took some work and many more idea lists. Then I went and pitched it to all the networks with all of them. And then a couple of networks said yes. We picked a network to work with. And now we're in what's called development with a network on this show. And if we do well in development, then they greenlight a series. So each day I say, do I need to do anything? I still want to do this. I wake up and I decide, do I still want to do this? I still want to do this. What can I do to move it forward? I'll do that, a little bit of that. And that's how I do each day. So I know by doing that, I'm never doing things I don't like. You never want to do more of the thing. You never want to do less of the things you love to do more of the things you hate. And sometimes I get out of balance and I do more of the things I hate, but then I remind myself of that line and cut back on the things I hate to do more of the things I love.
Love it. We're going to play a game. I'm going to say a word or a phrase, and you're going to tell me the first thing that comes to mind. And it's very important that you say the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, this is hard for me because usually I riff on lots of things.
People get really frustrated. They're like, I should have sent me this in advance. So, first one, American dream.
I think of housing, and I think it's a failed dream.
It's a failed dream. Money.
Money, I get really anxious and stressed, and I think of all the times I've gone broke, and I think of PTSD on money, and I think, thank God, knock on wood, I've hopefully learned my lessons.
Nerdy.
I think I'm not a nerd, and everyone calls me one. I'm not a nerd. I was talking to some comedian the other day, like, okay, here's how a joke could work with like a nerdy guy like you. I'm not a nerd. Just because I look like one, curly hair and glasses doesn't make me a nerd.
My one of my friends was like I was talking about him, about my upcoming interviews, and he's like, I mentioned your name in passing, and he goes, oh, that nerdy guy, and I'm like, come on.
I'm not a nerdy guy. Well, what's the definition of a nerdy guy? Like, I think someone who has like very few social skills and like can rattle off like the cube root of like very high numbers
Yeah.
really quickly. But I can't. I'm not that good at math, and I think I have some social skills. I'm shy, but I have some social skills.
Next word, success.
Success, I think, always doing what you love to do. The ratio of love to hate during your day should be as high as possible.
Love.
Love, well, I love my wife who's sitting over there, and I love my kids, and I think, I don't know, there's more new age type things, but that's the first thing I think of.
Education.
Homeschooling.
Hey.
Like you learn everything by yourself.
Yeah, self-education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean not with mentors and people who teach you, but you have to drive that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
No mentor will choose you. You have to choose them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is for when you're older. Let's say you're starting a business. You have 2 employees. Let's say one's here and one's here. So one's better than the other. And people are thinking of firing the worst one. You have to ask this question. Is this one coachable or is this one coachable? If this one is coachable, you keep this one and you fire this one. Because this guy's going to go here. This person's going to stay here. So coachability and his sense that you were coachable, or Steve Jordan's sense that you were coachable, that is what it leads to mentors and teachers and success and so on.
Absolutely, James. My final word, James Altucher.
Nothing.
Nothing.
That's my
Are
first. My
Are you
gut
afraid
response.
of saying the wrong thing?
No, that's my gut. You say what's the first word that comes to mind, and nothing comes to mind.
Gotcha. So I highly, highly recommend. I mean, choose yourself right here. This book is a must read.
Oh, thank you.
I highly recommend. If you don't have it, I mean, a lot of people have this book. You must get it. JamesAltucher.com, right? People can learn more about you there. I've been a long time subscriber, multi-year subscriber to the Altucher Confidential.
I really appreciate it because you're very young, and people sometimes say, "Oh, what's your demographic?" Like everybody's supposed to have a demographic and like a marketing demographic. No, just anybody from the age of like 60. They're maybe recently retired and they want to figure out what to do with their lives, to 18 and they want to figure out what they want to do with their lives, and they want to be happier and not conform to the usual rules of happiness and success and society and so on.
Absolutely. And then the James Altucher Show, a great show. It's
Thank you.
It's one of my top 2, top 3 favorite podcasts, up there with Joe Rogan, and then of course I love the show.
Was just listening to Joe Rogan on the way over here.
Amazing. And is there anywhere else you'd like to point people to?
No, I don't like to really promote stuff.
Yeah, I feel that. So I have to acknowledge you, and I know you don't know this, but the only reason that I was able to publish that book right there is because of your self-publishing guide.
Oh, really? Great.
Otherwise, I would have had no clue how to do it. But it's actually shockingly simple, and you showed me how to do that. And I know you showed so many other people how to do the same. You've empowered people to dispel their truths in a book format, and I think it's a fantastic
Yeah,
service.
and it's hard to get a book published by mainstream publishers because there's only like 4 or 5 of them that could. So you're dependent on 4 or 5 people who don't know you, don't know your book, don't know your audience. You're dependent on these 4 or 5 people to say yes. When the reality is, you could write the book, you could upload it to Amazon, you could design the cover. Hopefully, you do a good job on all these different things. And by the way, self-published books on average sell more than traditionally published books. And they're actually, well, people say, but self-published books are not good. No, if you actually look at all the star reviews, the ranking, self-published books have, on average, a higher star review than traditionally published books.
Absolutely.
Not to say I would never traditionally publish again, but self-publishing I really love doing.
I really want to show people this if people are wanting to write a book. It's JamesAltucher.com/getpublished for the self-publishing guide. What is it?
I don't even know.
You don't remember?
Yeah.
Well, it's somewhere on the website. Is there a search button? I don't know. Yeah, I think there is.
I don't even know if there is, but if you just Google Altucher and self-publishing, you'll probably get there.
Yeah, it'll come up. I found it by complete accident without even doing that. So.
And if you can't spell my name, if you Google in quotes "I want to die," I'm usually the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th result, and that's how you can find out my name.
So
out of 17 million results.
Yeah, James, this has been a fantastic conversation. My final question for you is, if you could teach a course at a university, a course of your creation or otherwise, what would that be? We've talked about many things today. If you were to package it into a course, what is it?
It would either be like how to have ideas, which is sort of like, you know, a course on creativity, but that seems cliche. So it would be how to have ideas, or how to learn how to learn. So how to beat the 10,000 hour rule, which has basically been like a straitjacket for many people trying to learn things.
Absolutely. James Altucher, you're the man. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Jordan. This is great. You're a good interviewer.
Thank
Thanks.
you.